Welcome to Surfacing. In this episode, hosts Lisa Welchman and Andy Vitale speak to user experience design expert Laura Klein. Laura is the author of Build Better Products and UX for Lean Startups. Laura spoke about how a lack of reflection and consideration during the product development lifecycle contributes to some of the low-quality experiences we have online. She also reveals how her engineering background and love of logic impact the way she approaches user experience design.
Laura, you are one of those people that I think I know because you and I are always in the same spaces, but I am looking at your face now. Other people can see your beautiful picture, I'm sure, on our podcast website, and realizing I don't think we've actually ever met in person. Am I wrong about that?
I had that same conversation with myself earlier where I was like, have I met her? And it's going to be really embarrassing because I'm going to be like, I don't remember. And she's going to be like, oh no, we met in, because I have the memory of a goldfish.
Together.
Yeah, exactly. But I have the memory of a goldfish. So I don't remember things or people. And it's been a year since I've seen anyone. So yeah, no, I don't think so. But I agree. Like I see you online and we interact online. And I think that's like knowing each other, but just not quite as good.
Yeah, that's it. So I think that means we get to start with the basics, which is tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah. Are you
different than
question.
how you appear to be online?
Oh God, yes. I mean, for one, I don't drink. I'm an absolute lush online. No, I am a ex-engineer, current UX designer, but I've also been a product manager. I wrote a couple of books about product and UX sort of generally. I always kind of think of myself as like a product and UX generalist because when I learned, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And we did, I started with user research and, that's kind of, I actually started from user research and engineering, which is odd. And then I kind of put those together and I would do user research and I would make prototypes. And then some very kind folks taught me how to do the middle bit, which is the design bit. But I've always kind of done all of the things with the exception of visual design. And I've just been doing it for a really long time. And I kind of jump back and forth between all of those things. I'm either a PM or a designer or I'm not going back to engineering. I've promised myself. And I won't write another book. I swear. I promise.
But we'll touch on that later because I think that's not true. Because part of the reason why you're on this podcast is you reached out to us or we reached out to you or we bumped into each other online because Andy and I are threatening to write a book about safety and you were thinking about doing something very similar and we were like, let's talk about it. And I was like, let's get on the podcast and talk about it or whatever. So you may well write another book.
I was just thrilled that you two were going to do it because I was like, well, now it's in good hands and I can forget about it. No, I mean, I often think about, I always want to write the book and then just have it and then be able to, if anybody asks me about something I've written about, I want to be able to say, here, I already addressed that here, and I do a podcast called What is Wrong with UX? And there's, I don't know, 120 of those. So there's often something I can point people to, with me ranting about, Kate Rudder and I do it together. And, Kate and I are ranting about stuff. And that's, so I can kind of point to, oh, you want to know about X. Here you go. Yeah. I don't have to say the same thing over and over. And it's even better when somebody else does it because, then I don't have to do any work at all. And I can just be super lazy, which is great.
That makes me think it's probably the question that you are used to getting or don't even want to answer. But having seen UX grow up from nothing, right, essentially become a thing that we've labeled, even though we've been practicing human-centered design for years, just maybe not, it was screens and then it became applications and ecosystems and now it's entire organizations and whatever else it can be. What do you notice that's wrong with UX?
Business models is wrong with UX, largely. I think, yeah, I mean, to a large extent, the problems that I see are with companies in general are business model related. And some of that, I mean, I do feel like the last few years I've been on a bit of what I like to call sort of an apology tour. Because, I was around in the 90s, like I helped make this mess happen, in my tiny, tiny way. But yeah, I see people designing more sort of bad patterns and supporting business models that, nothing's spotless, nothing's perfect, nothing is, everything has trade-offs, and there's always some things cause benefits and, some harm. But I'm just seeing a lot of stuff where the harm seems to outweigh the benefits. And often that just comes down to, we're designing. It's not that we're designing badly, it's that we're designing bad products for bad people in some cases. And in other cases, we're just not thinking through what could go wrong with this thing. How could this be misused? And I do think that is, to a large extent, on designers. I think the business model stuff, we have a say in but often that say is, do we work for this person or not? I don't win a lot of fights about, the actual business model of companies, sadly, and I don't think a lot of designers do. But I do think that the not thinking through how could this be used to harm people, how has this sort of thing been used to harm people in the past, just how could this just hurt somebody unintentionally, not through, intentional, not through a dark pattern or anything, but just because it just went badly, like I screwed something up. I think a lot of that is on designers. And I just don't see designers paying attention to that as much as they pay attention to, sprinkling some UX on it or making it pretty or making it easy to use most of the time, but then some of the time making it impossible or making it clever or delightful instead of making it usable and useful. So
right.
Yeah.
A lot of that, all of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting because Lisa has a very similar perspective, and I've seen a shift over time
geniuses.
Of designers. I see designers really want to do the right thing, and I try to figure out like what is broken that's causing them to lose these battles or not notice these things or make the same mistakes. And I really did a deep thought around like, is it tools? Have the tools made it too easy that you don't have to think? You're just building something in the moment? I don't think it's tools. Tools change over time. Is it, the way that we're being taught in schools? Are schools not teaching the way to really understand design and the capabilities of design and go through a process? Or are they just jumping into like, follow this recipe and we're getting a bunch of Pinterest fails? Or is it truly like, is it the speed of agility? Is it the fact that the companies and the people we work with are like, we need this done now, and we're going to go back and we're going to make it better the next time around, which never seems to happen. And does that become the, like, it's just, we almost lose sight of the bigger picture because we're so in the weeds of such a small subset of a feature that we don't put the whole thing together, and everyone's saying, don't worry about it. Just keep moving fast because we have to get this out the door. And I'm thinking, as I'm speaking way longer than I usually do about this, I'm thinking that like there's a mix of all of that playing some part. But the biggest thing I see is that these companies are not wanting to hire newer designers, emerging designers. When I broke into design, I wasn't good at it. I was okay. I was okay enough to get a job. I probably should have gotten fired from my first job or two. But the people I worked with were like, hey, wait a minute, let me show you this. And now we're just so busy running in circles that it's like, we need you to have 5 years experience and hit the ground running because nobody has time to like show you how to learn how to teach you. So there's so many things that are oddly like contributing factors, but I still can't put my finger on one in particular and say this is it. This is where we went wrong.
Do we need one though? I mean,
True.
I everything that I see in life, and I've felt this way. So I studied political science in college. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. And we were always sort of encouraged to pick one paradigm to look at the world through. You know, like, oh, is it because of balance of power? Is it because of statism? Is it because of, great man? Like, what caused this thing to happen? And the answer is, it's the world that we're talking about. And the world is a messy, messy place. And all of those things contributed to all of that. I think that there's also the fact that, demand for UX designers has skyrocketed, which in a way is great, but in another way means that you have this giant open space for, maybe like education, I think, hasn't kept up with that. And so you get people into positions maybe in some places that they shouldn't be in, or that, where they can't be successful. And they don't have that kind of support, and that the number of, and maybe the very senior designers don't want to be in there training all the youngins. That's not what everybody wants to do. All of it. It's all hard, and it's all contributing, I think. There's probably more stuff.
Want to throw another one into that list that you didn't list, Laura, and see, Andy's probably heard me maybe not say it this clearly, but Andy and I recently recorded a deep dive on that horrible topic. Should designers learn how to code? We just wanted to spend like half an hour, 45 minutes picking that apart. And it actually ended up being a pretty good episode because we answered the question pretty early, which was, no, they don't really need to, and started to explore, why are we even asking that question? Like, what's going on around that? And so I'm kind of touching a little bit in that ballpark as well, but I think it might have to do with the culture of design in the mix of all of the other things. Yeah. Well, so
Yeah.
So I say I don't design things, and then design people say, yes, you design people systems. And it's like, okay, if we want to go on a technicality, I design people systems. But the reality is I'm not a trained designer. I haven't learned how to do the research. I don't know what the methodologies are as well. So I have the fact that I know that there are methodologies and methods for getting that done means that I know probably more than your average person, but that's not what I do for a living. But I'm around designers all the time. Right. And there is in that culture is this sense, even when I'm online, say on Twitter or something, and something bad happens in a social media channel, something gets exploited, somebody's private information is used in a way that they didn't ever intend it to be as well. Designers, some of them like you might say, oh, we've messed up. But the vast majority of it is, oh, my goodness, those .com business nuts. Right. And so there's this sense of in the culture of if it's a good thing and it's genius, we're going to claim it. Right. And if it's a bad thing, it's the bad business people trying to make a bunch of money to pay our 6-figure salaries. Right. So I know that sounds really cynical and harsh, but I really would like to get to the nub of this because you can't have it both ways. One can't have it both ways.
I agree.
Either you are responsible for creating that experience, and the reality is you didn't stand up for the right things when you designed it, right? I mean, these aren't people who are, these are not people working at Amazon having to relieve themselves in a bag. Right? These are people who work at, these are people
right.
who are working in a great environment. So there's something about that culture. And so that's super negative. And to go a little bit more neutral or maybe lean into positive, there's a mystique around design. There's the superstar designer. There's just, as it spins its way up into this wonderful fluffy cloud of like, they're doing this magical thing, right? That creates this experience. And so, you see a little bit of that flavor sometimes in IT, right? Less so now, where you get like these hardcore people who really know how to do the hard stuff, the stuff that really makes it work, right? There's all these developers around, but then there's like this genius person in a corner who's just really got the whole thing hopping. And they're kind of a mystique, but it's not the same as in the design community. And I think because design community has design skills, the way they're able to exploit that mystique is very beautiful, right? It's visually beautiful to see. It's, it's just, or whatever. So that's me talking for a long time in a podcast where we're supposed to be talking to you. But I think both Andy and I will sit back. What do you think about all of that? I think there's just something, I think designers like themselves a lot. I mean, am I wrong? Am I off?
Some of us, others of us hate ourselves.
Not all designers.
Both. Sometimes both at the same time. Yes, and I will yes and that. No, I agree with you 100%. I will say this. I see a lot of times that it gets set up in this, the PM is in charge of the business and the designer defends the users. And I think that's poisonous. Personally, because, and I try not to get into these semantic arguments about these kind of like general, but like that bothers me. And I'll tell you why. I think we all need to be responsible for both things. We all need to care about the users and we all need to care about the business. And by the business, I mean, the ethical business model where user needs and, business needs are somehow aligned in a way that doesn't destroy the rest of the planet, ideally. And again, nothing's perfect and nothing is completely clean, but the more we can get everybody's incentives aligned, I think the better off we are. And I agree. Like, we own some of that responsibility. Now, I will say a lot of designers get overruled by PMs, and that's just the business environment that a lot of us
define PM for folks who don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, product manager or product owner in an agile environment, or startup founder, who is generally the product person. So that, the product often gets to overrule design. And I think some of that is us not standing up and saying, no, this is important and we need to do it this way. Some of it is some designers standing up and saying, this is important about things that I personally wouldn't spend all of my capital on.
Like what's an example of something like that where you think they're just going for something that's maybe not?
Yeah, I see a lot of designers spend a lot of time on craft and making things beautiful, which are great things to do once you've made them useful, usable, and safe. Right? I think that if you're fighting to spend a lot of your time doing all of the crafty bits and, the visual design bits, that's, again, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying it can't really contribute to a great product experience. I'm just saying that there are other things that you also should care about. Does the system work? Is anybody thinking about how if I do one thing over here and then it's going to have an effect over here? Oh, we're in a multimodal environment where we've got people on different platforms, or we've got people, I have to interact with you as a human, and also I have to interact with a computer, and also they're interacting with a computer. And I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that could go wrong there. And somebody has to think through that experience too. And the fact that the corners are perfectly rounded on the buttons maybe isn't the most important thing that we need to spend a lot of time arguing about in some environments. Focus.
That makes sense. I want to double click on the relationship with product and design because
Wow.
Double click. I used a corporate word.
I was like, wow. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that before. I'm going to double click on that. I like that.
Yeah, that was literally the first. I've heard people say it a lot, and it was the first time it came out of my mouth. So
you've been assimilated.
It felt weird. But what I would really want to just understand. So in a lot of successful companies, there's that triad of product design and engineering and having equal weight in decisions. But what I'm seeing in some other companies and hearing about a lot from designers that are like just looking for mentorship is when there's another layer that is the true business, and where product isn't considered the business, they're considered the translation of business requirements to digital. And what they become, You know, in this situation, you can either become a shit umbrella or a shit funnel. And they're literally becoming the shit funnel. And it's business saying we need this, product reacting and saying, yes, we do. Everybody like run, this is what we're going to do. And no pushback. And I'm just wondering, like, as we talk about that other layer that sometimes exists, what have you seen, especially, you know, in your book, Build Better Products? Like, what is a good way for people in that situation to realistically have a solid argument when that situation arises?
Yeah. You ask what I've seen. The answer is nothing good. What ends up happening, it's funny because I do a workshop on complexity and prioritization. And one of the things that I talk about is that a lot of times what we get is product managers turn into sort of stakeholder interviewers or collectors of stakeholder requirements. So that means that the product manager, as you said, will be sort of the translator of the business, but they take that to mean, oh, I'm going to go around to all the stakeholders and I'm going to get a list of all the stakeholder needs and I'm going to make a list. I'm going to put that in the backlog and I'm going to, file tickets on it in Jira. And the Jira tickets are all going to say things like, as a user, I want to use more AI, which is A, useless, and B, not true. So that ends up showing up, and then designers get things at that level in that state where they've already decided what the next feature is that's going to be built. If it's not, we want to add more AI to it, it's, oh, we need to add comments. And then the designers automatically kind of go, okay, well, my job is to add more comments. And, okay, how do we do that? How might we add comments to this? And then they do a lot of ideation, but you've skipped this really important part of, is that the right thing to do? Like, is that a good idea? Like, where did that idea come
Whose
from?
job
and
is
so
that?
I do this whole.
Whose job is it?
Yeah.
Whose job is that?
Great
because
question.
Designers act like it's their job, right? When they criticize bad experiences, that's a lot of what I see, which is who let this happen, right? And so to hear you say that they're actually, Andy's calling it a shit funnel. And so when he said that at first, I thought, well, there used to be these things called analysts, right? Mm-hmm. That would pull this information. I'm old, right? That would pull this information together and analyze from a business perspective or whatever perspective. And it could be from a user perspective or from a safety perspective or quality or whatever, consistency with the brand, whether or not this was a good thing to do and what type of return might it provide and what can we expect. And I think those people got washed out with Agile.
Potentially.
Or maybe I'm wrong, but so I'm curious, like what do you think? I mean, is that just too simplistic?
No, I think so. There were things, there were analysts, and they absolutely, and there still are at a lot of companies. One of the things that I found is that often the ones that I have seen also are not great at actual coming up with the right feature. They might be very good at identifying problems. And so when you ask whose job is it to come up with sort of the right thing to make, hey, guess what? It's everybody's job, especially if you're on if you are on an Agile team where you're actually cross-functional and collaborative and semi-autonomous. That's the whole point, is that we're all supposed to make these decisions together, and that the designers are supposed to have input into the research on the actual users and what we can actually do there, and the engineers have their input, and we might get input also from analysts or from marketing or from sales, and those are all really important things. But the thing that I always teach people to do is that when somebody comes to you with a feature and says, build this feature or sprinkle some AI on it, the most important question that designers don't ask is, what are we trying to achieve here? Why are we building this? What is the goal of this feature, both for the business and for the user? What user behavior are you trying to change, and why? And what business improvement are you seeking? And once we've gotten to that point, great. What are some other ways we could possibly do that? It's not just about going out and finding user needs and ideating until we come up with, solutions to a really important user need, although it is some of that. It's, what do we want? That's strategy. The thing that makes me a little anxious is that that's the strategy part. People are always saying, oh, we need more strategy. We need a seat at the table. We need, great. Let's do strategy. Let's figure out what the hell the business needs, right? Let's figure out what the users need. Okay. Now we know that. Let's figure out the right way to deliver those things for everybody.
Well, it seems like by the time it's a Jira ticket, it's too late.
Oh, wildly
right. It's
too late.
Just
yes.
super too late by that time. And so
Yeah.
that's really interesting. You're validating a lot of random thoughts in my head. I don't know what they are. I won't say them out loud now, but it's just true. There's something in there, and maybe with time and talking to more people, we can work it out, because it's not go back to waterfall.
No.
Right?
No.
And it's not that, but there's something about the way the speed works that is missing something.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's got to be a way to sort of pull those things together in a better system, so that people who are tasked to actually do work and execute on work aren't being asked to do things that, whatever. And so it might be a leveling out of different, types of roles. But anyhow, that's interesting.
Yeah, Laura, you wrote a blog post probably a year ago about building a task flow. And it was such a deep dive on what at times feels like a lost art to me. I think one of the things I didn't mention before, as I was thinking about what's wrong with UX, I feel like the psychology around decision making and UX as a craft, and doing it right and taking time to build the artifacts that communicate the intent, are missing. I feel like that's a step that's skipped quite often, and I'd love for you to just, dive into how important that is for a couple.
I'm going to warn you, I can and have talked about task flows for hours at a time. You do not know what you are getting yourself into. I was absolutely destroyed by two things in my life. One was a discrete math class that I took, where I realized, if I had just I actually took it when I was 30, when I was trying to decide if I wanted to go back and get a CS degree, a master's in CS. And I realized, if I had taken this before I took all of that other math would have made sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you haven't taken a discrete math class, go check it out. Especially if you're a giant nerd like me. So I was ruined by that. And then I was also ruined by working 8 million years ago on contracts at Tell Me, which did voice interfaces, but specifically voice trees, which were just pure logic. Ugh. It's just,
I'm a symbolic logic girl. It's heaven. Yeah, you and I need to have a meal together, because when you were talking about that class, and I was like, logic saves everything.
The best. Yeah. So, I have this deep love affair with UML, which is universal markup language, something like that. Anyway, I don't know. It's just boxes and diagrams, and it's boxes and arrows, right? That's the thing that we're supposed to care about. And the reason that they're so important is because they are a way to model what we expect and don't expect an actual interaction to be, without starting to worry about how it's gonna look.
And the conditional statements around it, the conditions that surround a particular event. That's the part that honestly, I think just doesn't get what are the conditions around this event? Because once you understand that, then you understand what are the possibilities of what could happen. Positive and negative, expected outcomes, unexpected outcomes.
How could this start? Where could this go? What if there is an error here? What kinds of errors could there be? If it's this kind of an error, what do we show the user? If it's that kind of error, do we do something different? If we need more information from them, how do we handle that? What if it's just a whole big long line of what if, and then what's next? And it's so great because you find things like you find dead ends in all of your flows. Is there a place at which, somebody just ends up going, I don't know what to do next.
Right.
Yeah, right. Is there a part, where the whole thing just explodes? I don't know, maybe. The funny thing is that I tend to see this a lot with ex-engineers or with engineers, because engineers are that last line of defense for the user to a certain extent, where they're the ones who have to say, if everything goes to hell, this is what we're going to do. We're either the whole thing's going to fall over, you're going to have a terrible experience, or we're going to give you a nice experience and you're going to recover from that error. They're the ones putting in all of those things into code. As designers, we can't just hand wave that away. We can't just kind of go, well, it's got to look like this. We do a lot. What I see a lot is I see a lot of people doing what I call drawing a picture of a design, where they kind of draw a picture of one state in the whole thing, where everything's perfect and everybody's named the same thing and everybody's got a perfect headshot, on a white background, and and nobody is trying to attack anybody. And that's everything's already filled in. There's no zero data states. There's no errors. Everything went great. The happy path, that's where we are, right? We all went down the happy path and we got to nirvana and here we are. And I'm like, well, how the hell did we get here? And what could have gone wrong on our way? And that's what task flows help you figure out.
You're shocking me. I'm shocked.
Nice.
I'm completely shocked because honestly, the last time I hands-on built anything other than my own WordPress website was a very long time ago. But when I did that work, we did that. And it could be that I did that. We're talking about the late 1990s, right? So this is very early on, right? And I do come out of a background of symbolic logic and philosophy and I can code, not very well, but I get it, right? But I'm actually a little bit breath taken away because I assumed that someone in the development path was doing that. Right. And I'm around these teams all of the time. So everybody's fronting really well. Right. Like I assumed somebody must be doing that because to not do that feels super irresponsible. Why would you put an experience on the World Wide Web when you haven't considered, at least fundamentally, what could go right and what could go wrong and all sorts of possibilities? So that's, a little stunning.
I see these flows most often today in a lot of voice applications and when we're mapping out conversations and figuring out the flow of a conversation. But I see it less and less in like just updating certain pages on a website or, making, which is weird. You would think as you're improving the workflow, you're looking at this flow diagram and figuring out, well, what are we getting rid of? What are we working around? What are different paths that we're creating for, users or people to navigate through? So yeah, I see it from time to time. I see it on more complex things, but we started to touch on like, this is a good way to prevent what could go wrong. And I just wanted to take it back to safety because it was one of the things we said we just wanted to talk about. So, for you, Laura, you mentioned a few times, like make sure that something is usable, useful, and safe. And what does that mean to you?
The useful part is just that it's actually doing something that somebody wants it to do, right? Somebody wants to perform the task that you are letting them perform, and will hopefully pay you to allow them to do it. The usable is that they can do that with just a minimum of fuss. And that they can that it makes sense to most people. I'm actually not one of these people who believes that absolutely everything should be able to be done by absolutely everybody on the first try. Like, I shouldn't fly a plane. I don't have the skills.
I'll remember not to go on Laura's airline.
Yeah, keep that in mind. Oh, there's all sorts of things I should not be allowed to do. Somebody delivered a desk to me in several parts and was just like, well, I guess you're going to put it together. I was like, wow, you have overestimated your audience. So I'm just saying that I don't think that absolutely everything needs to be done without any, not everything is simple, right? But we should be able to do things that we want to be able to do with as little trouble as realistically possible and as little training as realistically possible while still achieving the outcomes that we want to achieve. The safe part is something that I honestly, I like I said, I was here in the 90s. I take this partially on myself. I was not responsible for most of the web, but I was there and there weren't very many of us. I didn't think enough about the impacts on, the world and everybody in it. And that's important and something that I would very much like to correct. And I'm very thankful for the people who are doing a much better job of it now, who are correcting some of that. I think that safe means that I can use something without, physical or emotional trauma, without being attacked, without, and just without like losing a bunch of my data. I mean, safety isn't just psychological safety. It's, I trusted you with my data. Please be careful with it. This is important to me. These photos are important to me. Please do not lose them or sell them. This thing is private. Please keep it so. That there are all of these things that we just kind of expect from technology. That I think a good example is like all the delivery apps, right? Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Hopefully we're near the end of a pandemic. Fingers crossed. Let's go vaccination. So we just experienced over a year of just absolute nightmare, and a lot of people who could not safely go places and go to the store and buy things relied a lot on delivery services. And I get it. And I think that in many cases, the folks who were actually doing that work were treated very, very, very poorly. And I don't think that the people who were using the delivery services, myself included, wanted that to be true. That was not a thing that we wanted. We did not want to take advantage of other people. We wanted to use the services that were sold to us, and we trusted that they would be safe for everybody, and they were not, and they are not. And that is a thing that I think I would rather that the companies address.
This obviously, because Andy and I are, thinking about safety a lot, and that's originally what drove us together to talk and led to this podcast. Ultimately, it was a way to not write a book, was to have a podcast. But I think, the way that you're describing this is very evocative to me, because one of the things that I'm always trying to pull things back to is the comparison to our actual physical world, right? And so we live in a physical world that is not 100% safe, right? That system of being alive in the world it doesn't offer that. Depending on who you are and where you were born, you get more or less of that, and sometimes a whole lot more or a whole lot less, depending on where you arrive into that system. So I'm not trying to minimize that fact, right? But let's just get a little philosophical for a second, right? Which usually philosophy tends to push those things aside, right? And just sort of try to talk about things in a purist form. How safe can we be? Right, when we're talking about safety, and is it right, and this is just a very broad question, is it right to compare online safety, even though most experiences cross the chasm of online and physical world, right? But let's just go there. Online safety, is that a similar parallel, or maybe do we need to be more safety conscious online, particularly with the web and the internet, because of the speed and pervasiveness and how fast data flows? I mean, I can see a tiger coming at me and it might be fast, but it's in this moment at this time, versus I've put my data in a system and all of these processes are happening and it's flowing places that I can't even see, right? And so do you think I guess it's not really a question, like, what are your thoughts about that when you reflect about those two types of things?
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever get to complete safety physically or online. I do think that online and physical, I agree with you. I think that they are bleeding into one another more and more and more. I do think that online is a real place. Even if it is exclusively online, I think that that's a real place. And I think that, we expect people to be in places online and doing things. And the fact that some folks who are online in the places that, we have wildly different experiences, and some of them are really legitimately terrible. I think we could do better. Let's put it that way. Do I think it's perfect? No. Like I said with business models, I don't think anything's completely clean. Like, we're living in a capitalist society. Like that's going to bleed into stuff. That is where we are now. The world in which we live is not perfectly safe. It is not perfectly equitable. I totally agree. Do I think that we could do just so much better on all of it? Yes. But it's going to be super hard. And I think we all have to care. And I think that there are lots and lots and lots of ways that, we as you pointed out, like a lot of designers, we're fairly well paid. Like we're making these big decisions, we have influence with people who, we're building things. I'm not, but, people are building things for millions or billions of people. You can't pretend like you don't have any impact there. You do. And I mean, do I think you always have to be perfect? Do I think you always have to die on every hill or fight every battle or tilt every windmill? No, that's exhausting. Come on. Sometimes you just got to go and, have a margarita, sit on the beach. I get it. But I think we could all be doing a hell of a lot better if we all thought more about how could this go badly? And is there anything that I can do to prevent it? A lot of times, the thing that drives me, again, very, very, makes me very, very angry, is that doing the right thing wouldn't be any harder than doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's just, that's fascinating.
Right.
That what you're saying makes it just sort of begs a question in my mind, at least, which is what role do you think policy is going to play in this and regulation? I mean, I have a talk that I give around, technology maturation process and policy. Always things get regulated every time, right? So there's going to be regulation that comes into play. The question is, what's the quality and who's going to make it and when and how and what will it look like? If you could kind of put on your future eyes on that, what do you think might come into place, or would you want to come into place to sort of help keep these systems in check?
I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more privacy laws and a lot more, data retention and giving up data and those kinds of things. I think those will then be gamed by all of the big players, or written by all of the big players. And that will be unfortunate. But I think they will improve things. I think that some of the European privacy laws have improved things some again. I think the worse job we do about all this stuff and the worse we make ourselves look as tech. I mean, I'm starting like including us all in tech. I know that not everybody is in the same part of tech, but I think the worst that the worst of us do is going to have a real big impact on how much the rest of us
regulated. Yeah.
Policy regulated. Yeah. That's going to make a real big difference. And boy, I do not want Zuckerberg and Musk speaking for me. I mean, they are not the ones that I did not elect them. Kings of tech.
It's the way the money flows, man. I mean, it's just, that's just how it's going to roll. And, the worst.
Yep.
And that's a pattern that we see over and over again in sort of technology policy arena. There are a few very large bad actors or a few very large bad outcomes, right, that occur, and you have to regulate against them to protect the majority. So I think that's all going to be, that's interesting.
Yeah, I hope that we see more regular. Part of the problem is that I am also, again, I was an engineer in the 90s. Like I also have this very strong feeling that like politicians are not great at understanding technology, and they're probably not going to write great regulations about it, and that is also a problem. And so that's why I kind of feel like we also need to have some internal regulation, which of course is much harder because, again, a few bad actors can screw everything up.
Yeah, that's true. I wanted to also, I'm going to say double click again because it's funny to me now. I want to double click on regulations a little bit because, as you mentioned, starting early and having made some mistakes, we've learned from that. But but we're in tech, and a lot of things around tech are innovation. And, you've taught a course on product innovation through design thinking. So I'm just curious, when we talk safety, like there's a level of innovation that needs to happen that in the beginning, maybe regulation hurts or prevents. And even the thought of safety, like we need to be like, yes, don't kill anyone. Yes, don't cause major emotional, psychological, economic, physical harm. But like, how do we innovate in a world that like requires us to make mistakes? And sometimes we need to make bad mistakes make mistakes that have bad outcomes to really learn how to innovate in that space.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have the right answer for that. I think that one of the things I will say is that I think that most of the things that we talk about as innovation in tech are bullshit. Let's just get that out of the way. I think most of the time that's not innovation. You have just reinvented,
laundry delivery. Yeah.
Servants. Laundry delivery. You have reinvented servants. Like that. Okay, that's all right, fine. Like if you're willing to pay for it and somebody's willing to do it, all right. Like we should address that in other ways. But that's it. There's a lot of stuff that we call innovative that isn't real innovative. Let's just say that. That said, there are some bigger actual tech breakthroughs that I agree. You're gonna need to be a little bit like we won't be able to regulate those because we won't even know what they are yet. I actually think that the big tech breakthroughs are the least likely to be regulated early on because, again, they're brand new things, right? You come up with something wildly new. Nobody's got any regulations right now because nobody's ever seen it.
Right.
That's actually part of that. That may actually be part of the problem. But a lot of what we're seeing, and this is, I think, what makes me so angry, is that we're seeing the same mistakes over and over again, right? We're seeing data breaches. We're seeing people mishandling other people's information. We're seeing, bias coded into algorithms over and over and over. We're seeing people, losing out on job opportunities or being, advertised housing because they're white. And these are all things that we have dealt with in other formats before, not perfectly, not well, but we do can we just not make the same mistakes again and again? Let's make new mistakes. Let's make interesting mistakes.
Whenever there's a new technology, and particularly with the World Wide Web, which is the thing that happened that didn't get regulated, the rest of it's like noise and dust. It's huge. Like social media, all of it's huge. But the web is the thing that happened where I was like, never seen anything like it. Let's just let it rip, right? And we did, and here we are. Almost 30 years into the into the commercial web, and this is what we got. But I think that the web, any technology, and in this instance, the World Wide Web, can only manifest who we are as a community and as people. And so it can't be better than the people making it. And so as long as we have biases in our real world, in our minds, in our hearts, we have difficulty getting along, we have war, we have people who exploit each other financially, we have sexual misconduct, there's just a list of things that exist in the real world. To expect that anything that we invent is going to be beyond that is just kind of crazy. I mean, we have to get better as people in order to create a better experience. And I think, just going back to UX, my starry-eyed vision of UX is that people who are designers are trying to get to a better experience, to a more perfect, to be American, a more perfect experience for human beings. And what's so disappointing is they just got sucked into the machine like everybody else, right? And so I think that's what's really, sort of a challenge for me. And I'm hoping that UX folks can use the skills that they have to turn that machine, because not everyone in this system, it's not the salespeople, it's not the chief executives, it's not the board. That's not part of their remit to actually do that work, right? If you're on the board or you have a C in front of your name, you're supposed to be hitting that bottom line in a for-profit company. I mean, but user experience people are actually, that's part of their remit. And so my hope is that is what can happen. I don't know what your thoughts are about what the possibilities are around that. Like, what do you think could change in the UX community to help them be less of a victim, right? And more of a leader in helping to correct this issue?
Well, I mean, as you point out, the problem is people. The problem is that the problem with the web is that humans use it. Yes, and make it. Yes, this is all extremely depressing, and you're right, of course. But that said, I actually do think that we can make. I don't know that we can make people better. I think we can make people behave better. I don't think we can make everybody behave perfectly, or I don't think we can even agree on what perfect is for everybody to behave. But I think that as a general rule, we can create an environment where most people can at least be and, get their things done and be effective and maybe have a good time, and we can protect each other from each other to a certain extent. And I do think that is, yes, I agree that is the remit of designers. I think it's also the remit of product people. And I would love it to be the remit of C-level people. Like, I actually want them to care about this. I think that the way that we make them care about it is that we make a big deal about it on social media, and then suddenly they care about it, which, it's a little reactive, but I'll take it. Fine. Like, I'd rather they know that it's happening and actually care about it, because if they care about it, it's more likely that the people who work for them will care about it. So I do think that is one of the ways that we do make things a little bit better. But I think that we need to be more aware of all the kinds of people who are using the thing that we are using. One of the ways that we do that, of course, is to build the thing with people who are more like all of our users. Surprise, right? Teams that have diverse backgrounds actually, it turns out, have these conversations sometimes. Not 100% of the time. You still have to listen to all of them. It doesn't work if you just have one person in the room going, excuse me, I think that's going to be really bad. Oh, shut up. We never listen to you. That turns out that goes very poorly for everybody involved, especially for that one poor person who ends up in a lot of therapy. Ask me how I know. Anyway, moving on. All I'm saying is, teams that have lots of different kinds of people and who look more like the users of the product tend to be able to represent the perspectives of the users of the product more effectively. Where you can't do that, or where you don't have that 100%, nobody's going to have it 100%. Doing more user research, sharing that user research out with other people, making sure that everybody in the company is actually exposed to what is going on makes a huge difference. Turns out a lot of times people make decisions about things because they really don't know, because they're just ignorant. And, remember, everybody's new once, right? Everybody encounters something for the first time every day, and they're going to be surprised by it. And those of us who've seen it 1,000 times have to deal with that. And so let's figure out a safe way to get everybody exposed to all of the things so that they don't make the same stupid mistakes that I made when I was 25.
Exactly. And they're making the same mistakes, but this time it's technology. I didn't make that mistake. The technology did it. It's not me. Don't look at me, even though I coded it or came up with the algorithm or decided what it was going to do. Like, I didn't know that was going to happen. Like,
how could we possibly have known such a thing? Right. Whomst among us? Yeah, like literally everybody. Ask anybody. Seriously.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. I think, we're right at time. So how do people find you, Laura? How do they get in touch with you? How do they continue on this journey with you?
Oh, I'm impossible to avoid. I'm everywhere. No, you can follow me on Twitter if you're not sensitive to things. I'm Laura Klein on Twitter. I have a podcast, What is Wrong with UX, with Kate Rutter, who is my delightful co-host. At the moment, it's sort of an occasional podcast because she, silly thing, is writing a book.
There you go. And you're going to write another one too. I know it.
I am no, you can't. You can't make me. I do. Curse you. I have 2 books. I have UX for Lean Startups and Build Better Products. And I have a website at usersknow.com. That's usersknow.com. Someday I will buy Users Know. And
that's been the whole problem, though.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to do the anti one. Just like, never listen to the users. They're terrible.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really fun conversation, and I hope we actually do get to meet in person sometime.
I would love that.
I think we should
for
talk
so
about
many
logic.
reasons. We should absolutely talk about logic.
We
Can
could
we just
totally
have a big
do
old
it.
nerd
Andy
fest
will be
where we
like,
just,
whatever.
where we just diagram stuff.
You know what? Like I have a logic story. So my first playing of like figuring out logic at an early stage of my career, when I was teaching at a university in Florida, one of our criminal justice instructors was writing a book or writing an accompaniment to a book on how to determine whether you charge crimes. And it was like a yes or no matrix based on certain situations, the difference between like robbery and burglary and all different crimes. And it was, I created it in Director, and I had to build the logic out entirely myself. Like, if this is the thing, then it's this statute.
Yeah.
And the statute book was like,
Yeah.
3 feet thick, but he's like, we just need to figure out how to make this in an application. It was on a CD-ROM, so like just going through that and then making mistakes.
killed someone.
And, like, I don't know, I'm lost. So yeah.
I mean,
So
we're
I
not saying
had to
it's
go back and
entirely your fault, Andy, but yeah, I mean.
So I'm in on the logic
Okay, for
geeking
sure.
out
Well, that's
session
good
for
to
sure.
know.
All right.
Laura, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much
Yep.
for having me. This was great.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy surfacing, please rate, review, and follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/surfacingpodcast. If you have suggestions for guests or a topic you'd like to hear about on Surfacing, please reach out via the contact form found at surfacingpodcast.com.